Name your price. The words drifted across the quiet morning like they had ended 1,000 negotiations before. Calm, confident, almost effortless. But this time, they landed somewhere money had never reached. Ada Okafor looked at the stack of crisp $100 bills resting in the billionaire CEO's hand, then at the polished black SUV parked beside her tiny roadside food stand, its chrome reflecting the rising Georgia sun, and finally into the eyes of Damilare Adewale, one of the youngest billionaire CEOs in America's hospitality industry. Around them, the neighborhood slowly awakened. Fresh coffee drifted from a nearby cafe. A city bus sighed to a stop. The soft crackle of hot oil filled the air as golden Akara floated gently across the surface of the cast-iron pan. Office workers checked their watches. Construction crews lined up for breakfast. The scent of onions, peppers, and fried beans mixed with the cool morning breeze. It was the kind of place powerful people usually drove past without seeing. But Damilare had stopped, and for reasons he still couldn't explain, he had no desire to leave. No, Ada answered quietly. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Somehow it silenced everything around them. The driver standing beside the SUV lowered his eyes, expecting frustration. The security detail exchanged quick glances. Customers waiting in line looked from Ada to the expensive vehicle, trying to understand why the billionaire CEO, who owned luxury hotels across the country, was standing in front of a simple black waitress selling breakfast from a folding table. Damilare blinked once, surprised not by the refusal itself, but by how naturally she had spoken it. "You misunderstand," he said with the patient smile that had convinced investors to trust him with billion-dollar expansions. "I'm simply paying extra." Ada folded the top of the paper bag containing the last of the Akara and carefully handed it to him. "You asked for all the food," she replied. "You paid for all the food. That part is fair." She gently placed the remaining bills back into his hand. "But you can't pay extra for my dignity." A quiet murmur rolled through the line of customers. Someone whispered his name. Another person quietly lifted a phone, curiosity replacing conversation. Damilare stared at the money now resting in his own palm. During board meetings, no one questioned his numbers. During acquisitions, no one returned his offers. During negotiations, every obstacle eventually became another signature on another contract. Yet this woman, dressed in a neatly pressed black waitress uniform beneath a simple apron, had rejected the easiest money she could make all week without raising her voice once. There was no anger in her expression, no resentment, only calm certainty, the kind built over years of choosing self-respect instead of shortcuts. She turned back toward the frying pan, lifting another batch of fresh Akara from the bubbling oil as though the richest man on the sidewalk had become just another customer. Damilare watched her work with quiet precision. Every movement carried purpose. Every smile she offered the next customer felt genuine, not rehearsed. An elderly veteran stepped forward, searching every pocket before apologizing that he had forgotten his wallet. Ada simply wrapped 2 warm pieces of Akara and handed them over. "Come back tomorrow," she said softly. "Breakfast shouldn't have to wait." The old man smiled with grateful eyes before walking away. Damilare felt something unfamiliar settle heavily in his chest. His entire career had been built on measuring value through numbers, profits, and market share. Yet standing beside that tiny food stand, he had just witnessed a kind of wealth no balance sheet had ever taught him how to calculate. For the first time in years, the billionaire CEO who could buy almost anything realized he had just met someone who couldn't be bought at all. A man who spent his life making billion-dollar decisions should not have been thinking about a roadside breakfast stand during a board meeting. Yet that was exactly where Damilare's mind wandered as executives presented quarterly revenue projections on a 40-foot digital screen. The conference room overlooked downtown Atlanta through walls of glass. Every chair around the polished walnut table was occupied by senior executives wearing tailored suits and carrying tablets filled with charts, forecasts, and acquisition plans. Normally, Damilare noticed every detail. He questioned every percentage point. He challenged every assumption. Today, he barely heard the presentation. His chief financial officer paused midway through a sentence. "Sir." Damilare looked up. "I am sorry." "Continue." The numbers resumed, but his thoughts drifted back to Ada's quiet voice. "You cannot pay extra for my dignity." Those 7 words refused to leave him alone. After the meeting ended, his executive assistant hurried beside him through the marble lobby. Your lunch with the investors begins in 30 minutes. Damelaire glanced toward the revolving doors instead. Reschedule it. She blinked in surprise. They have been waiting 3 weeks for this meeting. They can wait one more day. Before she could ask another question, he was already walking toward the underground garage. 20 minutes later, the familiar scent of fresh Akara greeted him before he even stepped out of the vehicle. The morning crowd looked larger than yesterday. Office workers formed a line stretching almost halfway down the block. Ada moved with quiet efficiency, greeting each customer by name whenever she could. She remembered who preferred extra onions, who avoided spicy peppers, and who always ordered food for someone waiting at home. There was no expensive technology helping her manage the crowd. No digital ordering system. No management consultants. Only genuine attention. Damelaire stood quietly at the back of the line without announcing himself. Several customers recognized him immediately, but he simply nodded and waited his turn like everyone else. When he finally reached the front, Ada smiled politely. Good morning. Good morning. She reached for a fresh paper bag. The usual? He smiled before realizing she had remembered him after only one visit. The usual. She filled the bag carefully before naming the exact price. This time Damelaire handed her only the correct amount. Ada accepted it with a small nod. Thank you. You seem surprised, she said. Yesterday you tried to pay much more. Yesterday, I thought generosity meant giving extra money. Ada folded the top of the bag before handing it across the table. And today? Damelaire looked around at the people waiting patiently behind him. Parents buying breakfast before work. Nurses still wearing hospital scrubs after overnight shifts. Construction workers laughing over hot coffee. College students counting dollar bills before ordering. Today, I think generosity begins by respecting how someone chooses to earn their living. Ada looked at him for a brief moment, studying whether those words were sincere or simply polished enough to sound convincing. Before she could answer, another customer stepped forward carrying a little girl who could not have been older than 6. The child smiled shyly at Ada. Miss Ada, I got an A on my spelling test. Ada's entire face brightened. She reached beneath the table and handed the little girl an extra piece of warm Akara. That deserves a celebration. The mother immediately reached for her wallet. Ada gently shook her head. This one is for hard work. Damelaire watched the little girl's eyes light up as though she had just received something priceless. For the second morning in a row, the billionaire CEO found himself witnessing another investment that would never appear on any financial statement, yet somehow produced richer returns than many companies he had spent years building. By the third morning, people had started noticing a pattern. The same black SUV arrived just after 7:30. The same billionaire CEO stepped out without an entourage surrounding him. The same line of customers quietly made room, not because anyone asked them to, but because curiosity naturally gathered wherever something unusual kept happening. The whispers grew louder each day. Some believed Damelaire was planning to buy the entire block. Others assumed he was filming a television commercial. A few insisted there had to be a business deal hidden somewhere beneath the smiles. Ada ignored every rumor. She greeted each customer exactly the same way she always had, never offering special treatment because someone wore an expensive watch or drove an expensive car. When Damelaire reached the front of the line, she handed him a fresh paper bag before he even spoke. You arrived earlier today, she observed. I had fewer meetings. That sounds healthier. He laughed softly. My board would disagree. Ada smiled, but only for a moment before another customer stepped forward asking for breakfast. Damelaire moved aside instead of lingering at the counter. He leaned against a nearby brick wall, quietly watching the organized rhythm of the small business. Every transaction lasted less than a minute, yet every person somehow left feeling seen. A young nurse received encouragement before starting another 12-hour shift. A delivery driver was reminded to drink enough water during the summer heat. A retired schoolteacher was asked about his grandson's college application. Ada remembered details most people forgot. She invested attention where others invested money. Nearly an hour later, the crowd finally disappeared. Ada wiped the counter clean while placing the empty trays into plastic storage containers. Only then did she notice Damelaire still standing nearby. Did you need something else? She asked. He shook his head. I was simply watching. Watching what? Someone who knows every customer's story. Ada shrugged as though there were nothing remarkable about it. People remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you sold them. The sentence settled quietly between them. Damelaire realized that none of the leadership seminars he had attended, none of the best-selling business books lining his office shelves, had explained human connection as clearly as that single sentence. Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. Vanessa Cole's name appeared across the screen. He hesitated only a second before accepting the call. "Where are you?" her voice asked immediately. "Working. Your assistant said you canceled breakfast with the investors again." It was necessary. Necessary for what? Her tone sharpened. "People are beginning to ask questions, Damelaire." He looked toward Ada, who was carefully packing leftover supplies into her aging pickup truck without paying the conversation any attention. "Let them ask." Vanessa paused. "Mother expects you at dinner tonight." "I will be there." "Good," she replied. "Because there are important family matters to discuss." The call ended, leaving only the distant sounds of morning traffic and birds settling onto nearby power lines. Ada closed the truck door before turning back toward him. "Everything all right?" she asked politely. Damelaire forced a small smile. "Business never really sleeps." She nodded knowingly. "Neither does responsibility." Those words followed him all afternoon. That evening, the Adewale family dining room looked exactly as it always had. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished oak. Fine china rested on white linen. Every place setting was perfectly arranged. Yet despite all its elegance, something about the room felt strangely colder than the sidewalk where he had eaten breakfast that morning. Across the table sat Vanessa beside his mother, both waiting with composed expressions that suggested the conversation had already been decided long before he arrived. Mrs. Adewale waited until the dinner plates had been cleared before speaking. She believed difficult conversations deserved perfect timing, just as every important business decision deserved perfect preparation. The long mahogany table reflected the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, while city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was one of the most beautiful dining rooms in Atlanta, yet the silence settling over it felt heavier than marble. Vanessa rested her hands around a glass of sparkling water, elegant and composed, already dressed as though she belonged in every family portrait that had yet to be taken. Damelaire knew that expression well. It was the look of someone expecting confirmation rather than conversation. His mother folded her linen napkin with deliberate precision before meeting his eyes. "Your father spent 40 years building the reputation attached to our name," she said calmly. "One careless decision can damage what generations worked to create." Damelaire answered without hesitation. "Reputation should be protected by character, not appearances." Mrs. Adewale smiled politely, but there was little warmth behind it. "Appearances shape opportunity. You know that better than anyone." Vanessa leaned forward. "People are talking." "People always talk," Damelaire replied. "This is different." She unlocked her phone and placed it on the table. Several photographs filled the screen. One showed Damelaire standing beside Ada's breakfast stand. Another captured him smiling while accepting a paper bag from her. A third had already been cropped to make them appear closer than they really were. Thousands of comments scrolled beneath the images. Some praised his humility. Others questioned why one of America's most recognizable billionaire chief executive officers spent every morning with a black waitress from a working-class neighborhood. A few comments crossed into quiet prejudice disguised as curiosity. Mrs. Adewale sighed softly. "Your investors watch these things." "My investors care about quarterly earnings." "Your investors care about confidence," she corrected. "Confidence depends on stability, and stability depends on image." Damelaire looked down at the photographs. None of them showed anything inappropriate. They simply showed two people talking beside a food stand. Yet somehow the internet had already written a story neither of them had lived. Vanessa spoke again, her voice gentle enough to sound concerned. "You have worked too hard to let strangers create headlines that distract from your company. No one is creating headlines except the people sharing those pictures. Then stop giving them pictures to share." The room became quiet once more. Damelaire remembered Ada handing free breakfast to the elderly veteran. He remembered the little girl proudly celebrating her spelling test. He remembered the way Ada knew every customer's name, while many executives inside his own company barely knew the names of the people who cleaned their offices every evening. For the first time in years, success measured by stock prices suddenly felt incomplete. Across town, Ada finished her afternoon shift at Palm Crest Restaurant. She untied her apron, thanked the kitchen staff, and stepped outside carrying a small canvas bag filled with tomorrow morning's ingredients. As she walked toward the bus stop, two young servers whispered nearby without realizing she could hear them. "That is her. The woman from those pictures? I heard she is dating some billionaire chief executive officer." Ada kept walking. She had learned long ago that rumors traveled much faster than truth. Still, something about hearing strangers reduce her entire life to a photograph left an ache she could not quite explain. She looked toward the evening sky glowing orange above the city skyline and quietly reminded herself of the promise she had made years earlier. Never allow another person's opinion to become your identity. She did not know it yet, but somewhere across the city another person was beginning to question whether protecting his public image might cost him something infinitely more valuable. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds, but the line outside Ada's breakfast stand was already stretching toward the corner before sunrise. She greeted every customer with the same quiet warmth she always carried, refusing to let yesterday's whispers become today's burden. If anyone stared a little longer than usual, she simply smiled and handed them a warm paper bag. If someone recognized her from the photographs spreading across social media, she pretended not to notice. Dignity, she had learned, was often protected by refusing to perform for other people's assumptions. Across the city, Damelaire stood before a wall of screens inside Adewale Foods and Hospitality headquarters. His communications director clicked through dozens of online articles. Headlines speculated about a mysterious relationship between the billionaire chief executive officer and a black waitress. Financial blogs questioned whether his judgment had become emotional. Entertainment pages invented stories that had never happened. His legal team recommended silence. His public relations advisors recommended distance. One senior executive finally spoke what everyone else had been carefully avoiding. "With respect, sir, perhaps it would be wise not to visit her for a while." The room became still. Damelaire slowly closed the report lying before him. "Her?" he asked quietly. The executive nodded. "The waitress." Damelaire looked around the conference room. "Does she have a name?" No one answered. "Her name is Ada Okafor," he continued. "If we are going to discuss another human being inside this company, we will begin by respecting her enough to use it." Several executives lowered their eyes. The meeting ended only minutes later, but the silence followed everyone into the hallway. Nearly an hour afterward, Damelaire returned to the neighborhood without announcing his arrival. This time he left the vehicle a full block away and walked the remaining distance alone. As he approached the stand, he noticed something different. Several customers who usually stopped every morning hesitated before joining the line. Two women whispered while looking toward Ada. A man checked something on his phone before quietly walking away without ordering anything. Ada noticed it too, but she kept serving the people who remained. She refused to chase those who had already judged her. When Damelaire reached the counter, she greeted him with the same calm smile. "Good morning. Good morning." She prepared his order without asking what he wanted. "The usual?" "Always." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Damelaire glanced toward the customers, pretending not to watch them. "I am sorry." Ada looked up. "For what?" "For the attention my presence has brought into your life." She folded the top of the paper bag before placing it gently into his hands. "Attention is not the problem." He waited. "People deciding who you are before they know you," she said softly. "That is the difficult part." Damelaire felt the weight of those words settle inside him. For years he had believed success attracted criticism simply because people envied wealth. Standing before Ada, he realized something far more painful. Some people did not judge others because of what they had. They judged them because of who they believed they were. Before he could respond, a luxury sedan pulled sharply to the curb across the street. The driver's door opened, and Vanessa stepped out wearing dark sunglasses and a perfectly tailored cream-colored suit. She removed the glasses slowly, looked first at Damelaire, then at Ada, and finally at the growing crowd beginning to recognize her. A polished smile appeared on her face, but there was no warmth behind it. There was only calculation. Vanessa crossed the sidewalk with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life believing every room belonged to her before she entered it. Heads turned almost immediately. Expensive clothes had a way of announcing themselves, especially in neighborhoods where practicality mattered more than prestige. She stopped a few feet from Ada's stand, glanced briefly at the neatly arranged trays of fresh Akara, then smiled as though she had discovered something mildly amusing. "So this is where you have been disappearing every morning," she said, looking directly at Daimler. He answered calmly, "Good morning, Vanessa." "Is it?" she replied. "Your board is wondering where you are. Your mother is worried. Investors are asking questions. And you are standing here buying breakfast." Ada quietly continued serving the customer waiting beside the counter. She had no interest in becoming part of someone else's conversation. When the customer thanked her and walked away, Vanessa finally shifted her attention toward her. "You must be Ada?" "Yes, ma'am. I have heard quite a bit about you." Ada smiled politely. "I hope only the truth." Vanessa let out a soft laugh that sounded pleasant enough to anyone passing by, yet somehow carried the edge of a challenge. "Truth depends on who tells the story." Daimler stepped forward slightly. "Vanessa." She raised one hand without looking at him. "I only came because people are talking, and I thought it would be unfair not to meet the woman responsible for all the attention." Ada folded another paper bag while keeping her voice steady. "I have never asked anyone to pay attention to me." "No," Vanessa replied. "Sometimes attention simply follows opportunity." The sentence lingered in the morning air. Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances before pretending to study the menu written on the small chalkboard. Ada looked directly into Vanessa's eyes for the first time. There was no anger in her expression, only quiet confidence. "Opportunity is something people earn," she said gently. "Attention is something other people choose to give." For the first time since arriving, Vanessa's smile hesitated. Daimler noticed it immediately. So did several people standing nearby. Before anyone could speak again, an elderly woman slowly approached the stand carrying a reusable grocery bag. Ada greeted her warmly. "Miss Eleanor, your usual?" The woman nodded with a grateful smile. "If you still have some left." Ada quickly prepared the order before quietly placing an extra piece into the bag. Miss Eleanor reached for additional cash, but Ada gently closed the woman's hand around the money. "Your grandson starts chemotherapy today," she said softly. "Buy him some orange juice instead." The elderly woman's eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart." She walked away smiling through quiet tears. The entire exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, yet it changed the atmosphere more completely than any argument could have. Vanessa watched the woman disappear into the crowd before looking back at Ada. Something about what she had just witnessed unsettled her. There had been no performance, no audience seeking approval. Only simple kindness offered without expectation. Daimler spoke quietly. "That is the woman everyone keeps asking me about." Vanessa looked toward him. "You admire her. I respect her. There is a difference." "Not always." Across the street, another phone quietly rose above the crowd. Someone captured the three of them standing together. Within hours, the image would begin spreading across social media once again. But this photograph would tell a different story. It would show a billionaire chief executive officer standing beside a black waitress, while the woman everyone expected to command the moment realized that respect could never be inherited, purchased, or staged. It had to be earned one quiet act of grace at a time. The photograph spread faster than anyone expected. Before noon, local blogs had reposted it. By evening, national business pages were debating whether one of the country's most recognizable billionaire chief executive officers had abandoned corporate discipline for sentiment. Every headline carried its own version of the truth, yet none of them mentioned the elderly woman who had left with breakfast for her grandson or the dozens of working families Ada quietly served every morning. Kindness rarely generated as many clicks as speculation. Inside Adewale Foods and Hospitality headquarters, Daimler's communications team prepared 3 different public statements before lunch. His legal department drafted responses to inaccurate reports. Investors requested private meetings. Board members called his office one after another, each conversation sounding remarkably similar. They insisted the company needed stability, predictability, and distance from unnecessary distractions. By late afternoon, Daimler dismissed every meeting on his schedule except one. He walked alone through the executive floor until he reached the office of Marcus Ellison, the oldest member of the board and the only executive who had worked alongside his father. Marcus looked up from a stack of reports and smiled knowingly. "You look like a man carrying more than quarterly earnings." Damelaire closed the office door behind him. Everyone keeps telling me to protect the company. Marcus leaned back quietly. And what do you think? Damelaire stared through the window, overlooking downtown Atlanta. I think people keep confusing image with integrity. Marcus nodded slowly. Your father struggled with that lesson too. Damelaire turned toward him. He did. Many years ago, people questioned one of his decisions because it did not fit their expectations. He told me something I never forgot. Marcus paused before repeating the words exactly as he remembered them. If protecting your reputation requires abandoning your values, then you are protecting the wrong thing. The sentence settled into the room like an old truth, finally finding the right moment to be heard again. Meanwhile, several miles away, Ada finished her breakfast service before changing into her Black Waitress uniform for the afternoon shift at Palm Crest Restaurant. The elegant dining room buzzed with business lunches and afternoon meetings. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across polished tables, while soft piano music drifted through the room. Ada moved gracefully between guests, carrying trays with practiced confidence, never allowing the conversations around her to interrupt her focus. Yet she noticed something had changed. A few guests recognized her immediately. One woman quietly smiled and thanked her for her kindness after seeing the photograph online. Another customer asked for a different server without explanation. Ada treated both responses exactly the same. She believed character should remain steady whether people applauded or criticized it. During a short break, her younger sister Kemi hurried into the employee entrance carrying her phone. Ada, you need to see this. Ada wiped her hands before looking at the screen. A popular online account had posted the latest photograph beside a misleading caption suggesting that the billionaire chief executive officer planned to purchase the entire neighborhood where Ada lived and worked. Thousands of comments had already begun arguing beneath it. Ada handed the phone back with a quiet sigh. People believe stories because they are exciting, she said softly. The truth usually arrives later. Kemi frowned. Does it bother you? Ada looked through the restaurant window toward the busy street outside. Only if I start believing their version of my life more than my own. At that exact moment, across the city, someone else was already making plans to ensure the next story the public believed would not simply damage Ada's reputation. It would change the course of her entire life. The following morning began with a silence that felt unnatural. Usually the neighborhood came alive before sunrise with delivery trucks, coffee brewing behind cafe windows, and regular customers greeting one another by name. Today, conversations stopped whenever Ada looked up. People smiled politely, but many of them kept glancing at their phones before stepping into line. Rumors had matured overnight. They no longer sounded like questions. They sounded like facts. Ada noticed it in the hesitant eyes of customers who had trusted her for years. She noticed it in the longer pauses before someone accepted the breakfast she had prepared with the same care as always. Even so, she refused to change. Every order was cooked fresh. Every greeting remained sincere. Every thank you came with the same gentle smile. Across town, Vanessa sat inside her downtown office overlooking the city skyline, reading the newest wave of online comments with quiet satisfaction. She had learned long ago that people rarely needed complete lies. They only needed incomplete truths presented at exactly the right moment. She looked toward her public relations consultant seated across the glass conference table. People already believe there is a story, she said. Now they only need a villain. The consultant hesitated. We should be careful. There is nothing inappropriate in the photographs. Vanessa smiled faintly. Then we give them something else to discuss. She slid a folder across the table containing several images secretly taken around Ada's neighborhood over the past week. One showed Damelaire's vehicle parked nearby. Another captured Ada speaking with his driver while accepting payment for breakfast. None of the pictures showed anything dishonest, yet framed together they suggested something entirely different. Edit them carefully, Vanessa said. Do not invent. Simply remove what does not support the story. By lunchtime, new posts began appearing online. Cropped photographs implied private meetings that had never happened. Anonymous accounts suggested that the billionaire chief executive officer planned to replace local family-owned businesses with luxury developments. Other posts hinted that Ada had quietly accepted special favors in exchange for introducing neighborhood vendors to corporate buyers. No evidence appeared. None was necessary. Suspicion spread faster than proof. Meanwhile, inside Palm Crest Restaurant, Ada balanced a tray of sparkling water toward a table near the windows. Before she reached it, two guests lowered their voices, believing she could not hear them. That is the woman from the internet. She certainly knows how to meet powerful people. Ada placed the glasses on the table with steady hands. Enjoy your lunch, she said warmly before walking away. She did not defend herself. She had discovered years ago that dignity rarely grew louder by arguing with strangers. During her afternoon break, the restaurant manager called her into his office. He folded his hands carefully before speaking. Ada, I know you have always been one of our most dependable employees. She sensed the concern in his voice immediately. What happened? He turned his computer monitor toward her. Several customers had emailed the restaurant asking whether the employee appearing in the online stories still worked there. One message questioned whether Palmcrest supported unethical business relationships. Another threatened to organize a boycott until the situation became clear. The manager sighed heavily. I do not believe these rumors. Ada looked at him quietly. But he lowered his eyes. The owners are concerned about the restaurant's reputation. For the first time since meeting Billionaire, Ada felt the consequences of someone else's wealth reaching into the ordinary life she had worked so hard to build. Outside the office window, lunch service continued as though nothing had changed. Plates moved across the dining room. Soft piano music filled the air. Customers laughed over conversations completely unrelated to hers. Yet standing inside that small office, Ada realized that the greatest cost of a false story was never public embarrassment. It was watching honest work become overshadowed by doubts you never created. The following morning, Ada arrived before sunrise as she always did. She unlocked the small folding table, lit the burner beneath the cast iron pan, and quietly began preparing the first batch of Akara. For several minutes, no one came. The sidewalk that normally filled with familiar faces remained strangely empty. She looked across the street and noticed people watching from a distance, whispering before turning away. The rumors had finally reached the one place she had always believed would remain untouched. Her community. Ada took a slow breath and continued cooking anyway. Honest work, she reminded herself, does not lose its value because someone refuses to recognize it. Nearly 30 minutes later, one customer appeared. Then another. The elderly veteran she had once fed without payment smiled warmly as he stepped forward. I never believed those stories, he said. People who feed strangers with kindness do not sell their souls for money. Ada felt her eyes soften. Thank you. Before she could prepare his order, another vehicle stopped nearby. It was not the familiar black sport utility vehicle. It was a news van. A local investigative reporter stepped out carrying a microphone, followed by a cameraman and a producer. Behind them came several more people, including representatives from the Neighborhood Business Association and members of the city council. Confused conversations spread through the growing crowd. Moments later, another vehicle arrived. Billionaire stepped out alone carrying a thick folder instead of breakfast money. He walked directly toward the reporter before turning to face everyone gathered around the stand. The truth deserves to arrive in daylight, he said calmly. He handed copies of documents to the reporter, the council members, and the neighborhood association. Inside were complete security recordings, untouched photographs, digital records, and independent forensic reports proving that every online image had been intentionally cropped to remove context. Full video showed Ada returning every extra dollar that had ever been offered. Timestamps confirmed that anonymous posts had been traced back to a marketing contractor secretly hired through a company connected to Vanessa's private office. The investigative reporter looked up in disbelief. You are saying the entire story was manufactured? Billionaire nodded. Not manufactured. Rearranged. Sometimes removing the truth is enough to create a lie. Cameras immediately shifted toward the documents. Reporters began comparing the original images with the edited versions spreading online. The differences were impossible to ignore. One by one, the false narrative collapsed under the weight of complete evidence. At that moment, another vehicle arrived. Vanessa stepped out slowly, her usual confidence replaced by uneasy silence. She looked around at the cameras, then at Billionaire, and finally at Ada. For the first time since they had met, there were no clever words waiting behind her smile. I never wanted this to go this far, she said quietly. Ada looked at her with calm eyes. The moment we stop seeing other people as human beings, we never know how far something will go. Vanessa lowered her head. She offered no excuses because none remained. Damelaire turned toward Ada. I should have protected you sooner. Ada smiled gently. No, you protected the truth. There is a difference. The neighborhood slowly began filling once again. Customers stepped back into line. Some apologized. Others simply ordered breakfast with grateful smiles. The restaurant manager from Palm Crest arrived, carrying an envelope. Your position is waiting if you want it, he said. Ada thanked him before handing the envelope back. I appreciate that more than you know, but I think it is time to build something of my own. Several months later, a small corner cafe opened only 3 blocks from the old breakfast stand. The sign above the entrance read Ada's Place. Inside, every customer was greeted by name whenever possible. Veterans received free coffee every Friday. Children celebrating good report cards always left with an extra piece of Akara. The first framed decoration hanging beside the front door was not an award or a newspaper article. It was the old paper bag from the morning a billionaire chief executive officer learned that respect could never be purchased. On opening day, Damelaire entered quietly without cameras, security, or headlines. He waited patiently in line until it was finally his turn. Ada smiled exactly as she had on the very first morning. The usual? She asked. He smiled back. The usual. This time he placed the exact amount on the counter. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ada accepted it with a grateful nod before handing him a warm bag of fresh Akara. Their hands met for only a second, but neither looked away. Some people spend their lives believing money opens every door. Damelaire discovered that the greatest doors only open when respect arrives first. Ada never became extraordinary because a billionaire noticed her. She had always been extraordinary. The world simply needed enough light to finally see what dignity looked like when it refused to put a price on itself.